Cannabis Common Sense, the show that tells the truth about marijuana and the politics behind its prohibition.
Well, I am excited to finally have Jodie on the show. Jodie is well known in the activist community as Jodie Emery. Are you still going by Jodie Emery, Jodie? Or do you prefer another name?
That's what I'm known as. My name has never legally been Emery, but I'm known as Jodie Emery from many years of work. But I am divorced, and my name is Jodie Keith Ramsey, always has been, but also known as Jodie.
Okay, well, you have been an activist for pretty much your whole life. And so, as have I. So tell me how when's the first time you used marijuana and what was it like when you did?
When I was a teenager, I was very authoritarian and a leadership student, and I was against marijuana and drinking and drugs and sex and anything that teenagers did. I was My best friends were smoking marijuana, and I would give them a hard time about it. But then I tried beer and weed for the first time one night with them, and I didn't care for the beer, but this opened my mind to things. I started questioning everything I've been told, and it's been a journey ever since.
How did you become an activist? How did you get tied into uh, Cannabis Culture Magazine and Hemp BC and all of that?
Well, my best friends read Cannabis Culture Magazine, watched Pop TV back when it was the first and one of the only video websites on the internet. They informed me about this whole community, and because I was using cannabis questioning authority, 9/11 happened, and suddenly my stupid stoner friends were clearly the most informed about geopolitical warfare and drugs and war on terror. And I started questioning everything, and moved to Vancouver in 2004. Spent time with Mark Emery and his team at Culture headquarters, also the BC Marijuana Party bookstore, Hemp BC, many names over nearly 30 years of history, and started learning and taking part in rallies, running for office. Mark made me the assistant editor of Cannabis Culture Magazine in 2005, and yeah, it's nonstop journey. And most of my activism came not from a passion about itself, but more of a human rights concern. My upbringing was focused on protecting people and civil liberties and treating people well. And so the war on drugs was clearly, and the war on cannabis was clearly an attempt to deny people the right to liberty, security, and health. And for me, that's still the focus of all of my advocacy. I'm opposed to the use of force and coercion. I'm opposed to using the law to destroy lives and protecting lives. We see that on many different fronts throughout history. So my focus is always more of a civil liberties, human rights angle.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you on that. And now that cannabis is regulated, we're seeing these huge trying to push you and I and other people who are the activists out so they can make this market their own. And they're making big money doing it, obviously. And so I know you and I both worked on the Pot TV on which is part of Cannabis Culture. Is Cannabis Culture still coming out?
Well, it stopped printing in 2008 with the global recession. It's been online since, and we still produce independent journalism, and Pot TV still has regular shows. So it's still doing what we can out there, but as you noted, it's become a very different industry. A lot of very powerful multinational corporations spent the last decade preparing for an eventual change in policy that they could benefit from if they lobbied the right way. And it's true, many of the pioneers and the warriors who sacrificed their lives for the benefit of others have been targeted and pushed aside, not only by newcomers who have no understanding or respect to the origins of the movement and industry, but most concerningly is that we see a lot of former prohibitionists and police politicians who oppose legalization profiting from creating these companies. And years ago, I began a Twitter thread. It's still pinned to the top of my account. I called it the unfairness list. It listed more than 50 former politicians and police officers and bureaucrats some who opposed legalization, some who did nothing about the problem, and others who are just opportunists. But there has been a clear movement in the last, well, I'd say since 2013, a clear movement of big business and government comrades, cronies, taking advantage of the law to their benefit. And it's disappointing. It's been very traumatic and difficult to watch this all happen. The who tried to prevent it from happening, warning people, explaining the wrong direction as it was looking, and being worried that things are going to go badly. And unfortunately, we were right, but we were ignored. It's hard to reconcile a lot of what's been going on in the last few years. It's difficult to see that a lot of the movement, the spirit of cooperation, community, and just the tolerance and the peace and the love that's always been associated with cannabis being pushed aside in favor of discussion about stock markets, all sorts of technical financial jargon that I don't even understand. For all the small people who just wanted to grow cannabis and make people's lives better, they're denied the opportunity. And we're seeing what looks like new prohibition. I've been calling it new prohibition for many years, but what we're seeing, I think, is prohibition in another name, where it's similar to the Marijuana Tax Stamp Act long ago. I mean, it's not illegal. You could get a license, and yet nobody can get a license. And so we're seeing a lot of restrict and limit access messaging, and a lot of crony capitalism, which is very hard to fight back against. So cannabis culture, but it's definitely, we were targeted by the U.S. government and the Canadian government with multi-million-dollar operations designed to sideline us, and it's effective. It's really hard to win when big government decides to move against you. So every step along the way, I constantly tried to get legal, get licensed, get locations that would qualify, only to have the maps redrawn by local governments to exclude us. Lobbying with big corporations like Cannabis Growth, working with the city of Vancouver in the courtroom together, Bruce Linton and the city government in a court case against us to shut us down. I mean, this stuff seems like a conspiracy if it wasn't actually a lived experience. So I admit that the last few years have been very difficult, very depressing, along with a lot of character assassination. For whatever reason, I guess I'm outspoken, and some people don't like it, and it's been hard to watch the community turn in so many ways. And I can understand that a lot of people just want to be able to be in business and not fear arrest and not have to stress and worry and carry the weight of the world on their shoulders. So they get a license and they go into business, and then they shut up because they can't say anything anymore about criticizing the government when the government can take their license away. And I know people who have gone legal and who have had to agree to not comment about the injustices of the system in order to keep their life. So that worries me. It means people who are not willing to sacrifice everything will end up being silent. But the people who do sacrifice everything, speak up, well, we know what happens to them, and it's kind of scary and sad. So there's a reason, courage. There's a reason that it takes bravery and courage to do the right thing. It's because there is danger involved, and everyone has to decide what they want to do and say and how much. But there's also something to be said for surviving, living to fight another day, laying low, taking care of your health in order to take care of others. So I'm trying to find a balance of all that.
Me too. Me too. I've been through many of the same things. You talk about character assassination. I have been the target of character assassination for more than 30 years, to such that they've actually sent letters threatening in 95 to rape my children. And recently, a Canadian guy from Vancouver named Talal Yassin used forgeries to steal everything from me and my wife. They hired the most expensive law firm in Oregon, the same law firm that represents Nike and Intel and the Democratic Party. And they presented forgeries to court. The court accepted those. The judge who actually ruled against us in our preliminary hearing was later called out by the prosecutor for my county for being corrupt. It was written up in the newspaper and everything, and the television stations. And so, but after 3 years, I spent $170,000 in the first 6 months hiring lawyers to fight them. And I went broke. They spent at least $2 million. They filed 35,000 pages of gobbledygook. They got contempt of court citations against me. And they, in the end, I demanded a jury trial, knowing that no jury was going to rule in their favor. This guy, Talal Yassin, and his group from there in Vancouver, and a group of folks in Toronto, Alan Rutenberg and Ryan Roebuck and others. They basically, when I demanded a jury trial after 3 years, they dismissed their case. And so they've taken everything from me. And then my only option now is to hire more lawyers in Canada and the United States and go after them. But of course, I can't do that because I don't have the resources to fight somebody. I would actually go into court and it would just be my wife and I there. And there would be 3 attorneys, 2 of them that were making more than $1,000 an hour, and the other one making $500, and 3 or 4 paralegals. It's a long, complicated story. I won't bore, but in the end, all we can do is just keep going forward. When these kind of things happen, I'm still getting the character assassination attacks, and people I know are still getting messages saying crazy stuff. Like somehow I tried to sell Woody Harrelson a paper mill that doesn't exist or something, just kind of crazy stuff that journalists are getting to. But, what can we do? There's a group of folks out there that were the narcotics police, and they plotted to push us out of the way and take over this industry. And they've been pretty successful. So in fact, this guy, Ryan Roebuck and Talal Yassin and Alan Rutenberg, they're on the board of directors of the Kronos Group in Toronto. They brought in $1.8 billion from Altria Group, which is Marlboro Tobacco. And they took my company public, and it spiked in value, and they were selling $10 million worth of stock a day for several days, spiked up to $2.50 a share. And the total value of the company at that point was over 800 million Canadian dollars. It's since dropped down, and it's like 250 million Canadian dollars. But I have about $4,000 worth of stock in that. The guy who's recording that, he was also robbed. He's got a little bit of stock in that company too, but that was how they paid us off. I got $4,000 worth of stock to their 800 million Canadian dollars. It's really just outrageous.
As executives, they pay themselves multi-million-dollar perks and bonuses and salaries and stock options, and I've called it the great pot stock legalization scam. Like, it's just a stock market scheme. And a lot of these companies lobbied the government to create very expensive regulations that only expensive lawyers and bankrollers can finance and work their way around. And it was designed to exclude people who are not the wealthy. And it definitely was a law enforcement and corporate arrangement, including a lot of involvement from the government of Canada. The Liberal Party chief financial officer, Justin Trudeau's right-hand money man, went on to create Tweed, which became Canopy Growth. And they lobbied the government to raid all of the dispensaries and shut them down and give harsher punishments and sentences. And then the top cop of Canada in Toronto, who oversaw the G20 riots and abuses in Toronto in 2010, Bill Blair, he was put in charge of legalization, higher ranking than any politician. And he went across the country back and forth and told everybody, this is how it's going to be. Cannabis is a threat to public health and safety, and police are going to get hundreds of millions of dollars in enforcement. And there will be tougher laws, like 14 years in prison instead of 7. We went from 8 different cannabis laws federally to 45, which is why it was called Bill C-45. And then all these provincial, state-like regulations and then local regulations, and they just created a system for their own benefit. And it is really hard to fight against it because these people are not messing around. They are looking for blood and money, and we've seen so many shady tactics over the years. And like you said, it's what can we do about it? And it's hard to know what to do, except for, you know, I look at our current world situation right now, the division, the hatred, the anger, the fear, the absolute fear and terror that people are feeling and reacting emotionally. And I'm trying to figure out how to make the world a better place when it seems like a tsunami of negativity and awfulness is coming our way. And the only thing that can be done really is to just be good to your fellow mankind and womankind and all the people and plants and animals around you. Let someone into the traffic in front of you. Buy someone a coffee. Like, just do something in your immediate environment that can make a difference, regardless of what the government is doing or what giant multinational corporations are doing. But it is really sad to see that this model, this new corporate cannabis, this cannabis colonialism is what we can call it. It's happening all around the world. It happened in Jamaica and Africa and everywhere. We see these big corporations setting up systems that they can benefit from while excluding and punishing everyone else. And again, these battles are massive. I can't stop them. I tried, and then look what they did. So sometimes the overwhelming fear and concern about the world can be crippling. But that's why I started microdosing psilocybin, and I started growing. I grew cannabis plants last year. I can't in my current rental apartment, not allowed, of course. But I found little ways to treat myself better and to try and help others too. So it's really about finding ways to make your immediate world better, because it can be hard to fix problems that are so far beyond our reach. But it's all the collective little pieces of goodness that can make the world a better place. Just reminding people that we're all different, we're all complex, we're all diverse, and we're all ever evolving. And we need to be compassionate, forgiving, tolerant, and try to incorporate more cannabis and plant medicines into our lives as a therapy against everything that's going on right now. So that's, I don't know what the future holds. I could never have seen the world today a year ago, never could have imagined things being this different. And of course, economic upheaval and civil unrest, there's a lot of little things percolating that seem maybe more important than cannabis policy sometimes. Like, I sometimes feel like it doesn't matter if I comment about cannabis regulations because there's, you know, bigger problems going on, some might say. But then I do get encouraged seeing news stories like Illinois having cannabis consumption lounge starting up, or Nevada doing the same. And even in British Columbia here, they used to be, they are opposed to cannabis lounges. It's illegal. But the Union of Municipalities, the local governments, have been floating a resolution to find a way to create these lounges. So even though I'm not directly involved in the lobbying and speaking to parliament and legislatures like I used to, I did a lot of that before, but now it seems that people who are in the cannabis industry, whether they're big evil corporations or whether they're medium-sized businesses that are just trying to find a way in this new to them industry, like they don't understand the history and the oppression. They only know it's a new legal thing that you get into. There's some people in the cannabis industry who are honestly just giving it their best shot. I don't condemn them for getting legal and getting licensed. I'm trying to do the same. But it's just it's an interesting time.
It's a bittersweet pill to swallow. It definitely is. I mean, I have people, oh, aren't you so happy because to see what's happening with the industry that, you know, and congratulate me and thank me. And I am happy to see that. And I'm happy to see that people aren't going to jail as much. And, you know, a lot of people are getting out of jail. That's really exciting. But at the same time, there are forces behind the scenes. It's the same forces we've been warning about all these years, the petrochemical, pharmaceutical, military, industrial, transnational, corporate elite, fascist sons of a bitches. They're still out there, and they want to push us out of the way and marginalize us to the best of their ability. And so we just got to keep plugging away as best we can. And I know it's hard in the face of the oppression and the character assassination. It can get really personal, and I can see, given the level of character assassinations some of my associates are faced with, I can see why it kind of creates a poison pill around us where, you get these crazy things that they say, and it just makes it where, it's hard to get people involved in. But let's go back a little ways to what happened when you were, there was a time where you were flying down to see Mark like 2 or 3 or 4 times a month, right? So you were going to these for-profit prisons in the South primarily to see Mark. He was incarcerated he was in jail for over 4 years for selling seeds through the mail, which wasn't prosecuted in your home in Vancouver. It was prosecuted in Seattle, or in America. And the American government came after you. Do you want to talk a little bit about that period of time, which obviously was a pretty dark time, in terms of a lot of stress. We've been through a lot of stress through this, but at the same time, we've made some enormous strides, but obviously it's not enough. But I think it'd be good to rehash some of that history. It's our first time to have you on the show, and I'd love for you to talk about it.
Absolutely. Well, Mark Emery is most certainly a controversial, radical figure who started his activism campaigning against censorship in the media and against all sorts of unjust laws. So he started selling marijuana seeds through the mail in 1994 and told people, when you buy seeds from me, I will use the money to finance election campaigns, ballot initiatives, court cases, medical marijuana cases, all the activism that we need, rallies, the Global Marijuana March. So he started doing that with Cannabis Culture magazine being where the seed catalog was primarily printed, and then going on the internet. And he was enormously successful. And that meant millions and millions of dollars from cannabis growers who bought the seeds went into Mark Emery and Cannabis Culture's organization and went right out to the election campaigns and all these ballot initiatives and things that changed the world. We actually have documents from the U.S. government, from the Drug Enforcement Administration, claiming they followed all the money and all of it went to political candidates and election campaigns. So they knew what it was about, and they knew when they arrested Mark, he had no money. The point of making the money was to give it away to finance the movement. So from 94 to 2005, Mark was doing that. And the U.S. drug czar, John Walters, at the time, came to Vancouver when the Canadian government was talking about decriminalization around 2003 and 2002, 3, 4. And the U.S. government decided to come up with John Walters telling them, you're not going to legalize it, or we'll shut down the borders and we'll do all this stuff. And Mark went to that event, booked a table, and the activist heckled John Walters and said, that's bullshit, you're lying. And it was all over the national news. And he was very upset at Mark and activists and told the Vancouver police, I don't know who he is, but get rid of him. So the Vancouver police did investigate Mark for the seed selling, which he had already been investigated and arrested and charged and convicted on in the past, but it wasn't a big deal. He was a well-known political candidate and public figure. And so the Crown in British Columbia, which is like, it's like a body that decides whether to lay charges or not. Most of the time in Canada and the US, I think the police investigate and then say, we're going to charge you, and that's how it goes. But in British Columbia and one other province, we have a Crown, and the Crown decides whether the case is in the public interest. And they decided that arresting Mark Emery for seed selling again would not be in the public interest, so they declined. And the Vancouver police admitted that the file then went and made its way to the DEA in the United States. So the Canadian government worked with the US government in order to have Mark punished in a much more harsh environment in the United States. And that proceeded. He was arrested in July of 2005.
He was arrested with other people. So there were several people that were charged.
Yes, there was the BC3 is what they were known as. It was Mark's business partner, Michelle Rainey, and also Greg Williams, who was primarily at the seed desk, where he sold seeds in person in the store. Sadly, both Michelle and Greg have passed from cancer. Greg passed earlier this year, very suddenly, very unexpected, a tremendous loss. Marijuana Man, Greg Williams, please look him up. He sent seeds everywhere, huge part of the revolution we're all seeing today. And Michelle Rainey passed right after Mark was sentenced in 2000. So that was a long struggle for her. But the two of
But
them.
Mark, when he agreed to take this plea bargain offer, part of it was that those other two people would not be prosecuted.
Yes, an interesting bit of history was that the U.S. government actually asked the Canadian government, "Can you discharge Mark and make a plea deal and agree to 10 years in prison?" So we were in talks with the Canadian government, like, could we, instead of who knows how long in America, we could take a plea deal in Canada if the Canadian government agreed to charge Mark. But the Canadian government told the U.S. government, "Nope, we don't want to do it. We want him to face your system." So that 10-year plea deal was thrown out, and then the U.S. government allowed Mark to negotiate a 5-year sentence with Michelle and Greg both receiving no jail time at all. So Greg and Michelle went down to Seattle, pled guilty, came back to Canada, and then Mark went later on. He was the obvious main target. They always arrest collateral. When I was arrested in 2015, they charged a huge number of people alongside me so that I was coerced in a way to plead guilty and not fight. But there's other considerations about why I did what I did. But with respect to Mark and the U.S. government, they took the 5-year plea deal, and he was sent to Seattle initially, and then Nevada to a big sorting facility, and then to Georgia, or sorry, Mississippi. No, first Georgia, Folkston, Georgia. It was a private prison run by Geo Group. Horrendous place, absolutely awful. It had been shut down as a federal prison for a bit, and then a private company just bought it and reopened it. And Mark used an old typewriter they had to write down a lot of the horrible things that were happening to mostly non-American inmates, mostly Hispanic, as they were not in an American prison. So Mark was bringing attention to it. We had a member of our parliament go down and visit with me. A lot of attention was being brought, and the Department of Justice and the Bureau of Prisons decided that Mark Emery would be removed from that prison and sent to a medium security federal facility for Americans, mostly Americans, just to be, quite frankly, just to put him in a more comfortable place so he couldn't shine a light on the most horrible things that happened. So Yazoo City, Mississippi is where Mark spent most of his time, and I did go visit him every other weekend. All those years, I think it's over 5 months of travel time from airplanes and everything like that. And I spent about 5 months inside the prison, visiting rooms, waiting rooms, lobbies. So over time, I definitely saw up close and personal what the war on drugs is about, what the prison industrial complex is about, and so much of the history of America and Jim Crow laws being transformed into a system of oppression. I saw a lot of things, and it was very eye-opening, and it absolutely was difficult. And Facebook memories remind me how hard it was with little posts that I made. But when I look back on it, so much easier when you're far beyond the experience. But looking back, it felt very formative and very important. And during all that time, I was running for office. I was campaigning, being interviewed nonstop by the media, not about who I am, but about the message that would just flow out of me, this message of freedom and liberty and justice. Even though saying that now sounds so trivial, like peace and love, man. It's like, yeah, freedom and liberty and justice are actually really important. And I was able to feel very fulfilled, knowing that I was constantly making an impact, inspiring people and being inspired and being in this wonderful movement that was obviously on the right side of history to end prohibition. So feeling that we were gaining momentum after years of feeling like we were like never gonna end prohibition, and then suddenly it's like, oh, it might really happen, And I campaigned in California and in Washington, and of course a lot of the.
And I'd see you in the Seattle Hemp Fest, and you gave some of the most inspiring speeches there. There was a huge change in public mood during that period where Mark was incarcerated. So he came out to an entirely different world, and your support through that was really, really crucial and very inspiring, I've got to say. And I'm glad that the community stepped up and enabled you to make all those trips. Not many people. You weren't working at Cannabis Culture Magazine. Not many people can afford to travel like that, obviously. So most people are just locked up and alone, especially when they're sent 2,000, 3,000 miles from their loved ones.
Exactly. And that was a constant reminder to me that even when I was in the prison visiting rooms and I went with families who couldn't afford it, they would drive me and I would get the hotel or whatever arrangement we could do. And it was always really hard on those families, especially the kids. I can't stop thinking about the kids that you know, sometimes the moms would just tell them that daddy was working at a factory and so they're visiting at the factory, and a lot of really heartbreaking stuff.
The little children could believe that.
Exactly.
But obviously, once you get to be 6 or 7, those kind of stories don't stick anymore.
Exactly. And then once you're a kid and you're going to school and they're saying prisoners are bad people, and then you're like, oh, my dad? Like, it just, so a lot of that, you know, I saw, and it was difficult to go visit, but it was also, these were the luckiest people, you know, like most people couldn't afford phone calls or traveling or anything. Relationships fall apart and people, it's difficult, you know, in many ways, there were some feelings that might relate to people who are in the military. From what I've heard from others, you know, when the soldier goes off, especially in America, there's a whole lot more of that. But the soldier goes off to war, and wife stays home with the kids, and they keep in touch, but she has to carry on, and he starts to feel like, wow, they're doing okay without me. Like, and then they come home, and it's like, wow, you were all like, you survived without me here, and now I'm here. What's my use? Like, do you need me? What's my role? And there's so many psychological things with prisoners and families and dealing with separation. And yeah, I was blessed to be able to travel. And I should make very clear that during all this time, we never sold seeds and we never sold weed. Mark was not a marijuana seller. He only sold seeds. And for all those years that medical dispensaries started opening up, we were never involved. We never opened dispensaries. We were all about politics and media and our head shop and our lounge. And so the idea, I kind of wanted to keep it separate because I didn't want to be accused of being in it for profit. So for all those years, I was busting my butt. I never took a weekend. I never took a vacation, never traveled, never even went to the beach or the mountains or anywhere in Vancouver. I went from home to work, to home to work, to prison, to home, to work for years on end, years on end. And it was really hard. And Mark was a dependent, and I had to send him money. We did have some people donating. Dana Larson, wonderful, gave a lot of money, and random people would contribute. But I had to earn it all. I had to make sure our little head shop sold enough T-shirts and rolling papers that I could afford to do this. So it was extremely hard. And then when Mark finally got home in the middle of 2014,
so he was locked up altogether more than 4 years.
4.5 years for good behavior, 85%. So he was sentenced on, I think, September 10th or 9th, an anniversary coming up now. He was sentenced then in 2010, and then it was a 4-year something month arrangement. But of course, he gets released from U.S. custody, but he's sent to ICE, Immigrations and Custom Enforcement, so that they can transport him up to the border and get him back into Canada. And that takes time, and it's no fun. It's horrible. But he finally gets home in 2014. I was seeking a nomination to be a Liberal Party of Canada candidate in the federal election, focused entirely on making sure legalization went the right way and didn't get twisted. I didn't succeed on that front. The government, the Liberal Party canceled my nomination, but I still said legalization is so important. We have to support a party that supports it. It's the message more than the details. And that's what I said in Washington State with Initiative 502. I have to confess, I still feel a bit of conflict when
I did the exact same thing. I had a lot of misgivings about it, and there was a lot of debate at that Seattle Hemp Fest that we were at in 2012 about why are we supporting this? It doesn't allow people to grow their own. And even now in Washington State, here it is 9 years after that vote, and they still aren't allowed to grow their own. They have to buy it from expensive stores, and that's the problem when you accept these kind of deals. If they get locked in, especially with difficult political process, but at the same time, people aren't going to jail for having a joint, or and people are able to keep their jobs while using cannabis off work, and so it's a trade-off.
Yeah, there's lots of trade-offs. And I remember with Washington, I kept saying, BC and Canada, we share a border, and it was after the failure of Prop 19 in California. So I kept saying, if it fails the second time, if legalization fails at the ballot box the second time, we're in trouble for years to come. It'll send a big public message. So just getting the yes vote will not only, like, there might be some negative impact on the residents of Washington State, but it's like a sacrifice for Canada and the world to look at it. And when we see right now that Thailand is allowing marijuana in a much more open way, and there's places in the world where changes are happening in a positive direction, the overall trend is towards more freedom. But it's sometimes it feels like two steps forward, one step back. And like we're seeing in Spain that they're closing down all of the social clubs. What a
Yeah, exactly. I remember I got to see you and Mark when Mark just was out of jail in his first international trip at Spoke Row in
Yes.
Iru outside of San Sebastian. That was a oh, all right. Yeah, one of their, that is wonderful. There's the Expo Grow Award. I had spoke there in 2013, and that was the thing when Mark went in 2010, there was no legalization. We were talking about this initiative in California, but when he came out, it was already legal in Washington and Colorado. And we were up for voting for it a second time here in Oregon since we lost our campaign in 2012. But Alaska also passed in 2014 as well. So we saw a lot of movement forward. I remember when Mark got out, it was in Detroit and Windsor, right? They sent him across the it's the International Peace Bridge or the Rainbow Bridge there in between Detroit and Windsor. And that was a huge celebration.
Absolutely. It was kind of symbolic. It was this pioneer who planted the seeds of the movement coming back to see the harvest beginning. And that's when we were so broke. We were left with nothing, and all these dispensaries were starting to open up rapidly because court cases in Canada, especially, had constantly sided with the access to medical marijuana being a protected charter right. So we thought, I don't need
first,
you know.
I first met I didn't meet Mark until 1999, but I first started dealing with Mark when I was selling my hemp paper, which I started in 1988. And I think he was in London, Ontario with a bookstore. And he was fighting the government to sell High Times magazine. And he started selling my paper as well, my tree-free eco paper. And then I remember when he moved out to Vancouver, and I was just amazed at how much he accomplished there. But he was released again there into Ontario, which it's the biggest province by population, isn't it? And with Toronto being the huge city that it is in the middle of it. But he immediately started opening businesses to sell cannabis. I know how many dispensaries did you folks open in Toronto and around Canada?
Well, when Mark was extradited to serve his sentence, the company was given to me to operate. So when he came home, we had just the one headquarters in Vancouver. It's been in the media for years, our big building on West Hastings Street. And then Mark was unsure about what to do with a job because, quite frankly, I was running it. It was my team. I built it up into a big business. And we decided to expand into a second head shop and lounge in the same building as a dispensary. And we thought they'll do the dispensary stuff. We'll just open up a second head shop and a lounge because that's what we're interested in. And then I, with my team, started talking about, well, what if we don't have money and we need money and we're activists? What if we did with weed money what Mark did with seed money? So it was actually me who came up with this business idea that we would open up stores across Canada in a franchise type model so that the local business owners could own their own business. They could source their own supply to celebrate the local growers wherever they may be. And that part of the goal is that the money that they would give back to us, which is a minimal, tiny fee. I'm more of an activist than a business person. So when it comes to making money, I'm not that great. But when it comes to making a message, I do very well. But the idea of these dispensaries was that legalization was coming in Canada. And the government was describing a model that was not sounding very inclusive. And so I kept saying, why don't we open up stores, kind of like dispensaries, but we'll be the first in Canada to not discriminate against healthy people. Because medical marijuana dispensaries were everywhere, but many people kind of, said, oh, I have glaucoma, or they did a Skype appointment with a doctor. And there's nothing wrong with that when you're trying to get access. But everybody knew that it was unfair to the medical patients to kind of turn their medicine access into like a quasi phony, oh, we're all sick, so we're all going there. So it was like better in my mind to allow medical to stay medical and then allow recreational to have a place to go where they didn't need to sign up and create an account and get a doctor. Like, why not just allow patients and non-patients the ability to buy cannabis without going through this big, all these hurdles and stuff. So that's why cannabis culture was different. And when we opened our first locations in Vancouver was our first one, but the city redrew the map to make sure that wouldn't qualify to get a license, even though it originally did. And then we went out to Toronto.
Amazing that the neighborhood that you guys pioneered cannabis in was drawn out. That's just so biased and
The lease was up the street, like in an OK zone, and then they redrew the map like just one little box along that one stretch of street to exclude us. So that was the first
which was the center of cannabis culture in Canada, really. Oh, we're like skewing the one part that is the best place in the country.
And it's crazy. And so we ended up doing Toronto, and the day we were opening, coincidentally happened on the day of the Project Claudia raids. And this was a massive campaign and series of raids and arrests that happened in Toronto. Over 500 places were hit. And it was basically the first move of the government and corporations to try and eliminate the pre-existing industry and replace it with their own. So that was interesting, opening up our first store that was unique and got tons of media attention. And there was a press conference. And so we went and had a rally outside. And I was told, you could just walk in, you could go in with all the media. So I did. And there's a famous video out there that was broadcast live across every network in Canada on May 26, 2016. If you want to Google it, it says Jodie Emery, Justin Trudeau, and the Liberals lied about legalization or something like that. You'll find the video by
We
Google.
will put it in here and drop it in. I know Bill will be editing some things here.
Well, I note it was a very hot day and there was a lot of upset feelings. And what happened is this massive press conference is going on live across Canada. And everybody's confused because legalization is coming. Why are you doing prohibition style stuff? Like, aren't we supposed to be legalizing these businesses? Why are you raiding them? So there was a lot of questioning from the public and the media. And I happened to be in there and I started asking questions. And then I accidentally took over the press conference, I guess, because the police chief got mad and was like, get them out of here. But then the press conference fell apart because even the media were like, this doesn't make sense. And so while the cameras were still rolling, they went to me and I'm saying, that if this was based on complaints, there's more complaints about the loss of access and the Liberals have lied. This is about corporate takeover. I basically spoke the truth really loudly. And then that day, the Toronto police began an investigation into me and Mark and cannabis culture, which went on for many months until my arrest in early 2017.
And that was your first time to ever be arrested in 2017.
I was arrested in Montreal in December of 2016 because we did do, unexpected to me, we had somebody who was going to open up a Montreal dispensary, which is, in Canada, it's known that Montreal and Quebec are kind of run by the mafia, allegedly. So it's like a real tough province to get into, especially if you don't speak French. They don't want you. It's a very kind of, almost an anti-English province in Canada. It's an interesting country into itself almost. But we were going to open one shop there, but then our franchisee said, listen, I've managed to get like 10 locations. We can do like 10 on the same day. And then that turned into a massive kerfuffle with the government and the media. And then we were raided and I was arrested, but I had no weed and no money because I was the idea person. I wasn't trafficking. I wasn't doing the stuff that they thought. So they let us go that day. But Mark was arrested and charged because he was actually in a location selling. He wanted to. He knew what was coming, and that was his goal, was to face that. So December was my first time arrested. I was in the hotel. The police were like friendly as much as they can be friendly, and we didn't really have much trouble. But they took all my stuff, and it was a blizzard, -40. We had to flee to the airport to escape. My book is going to be really wild.
Yeah.
My actual arrest was in, like, the big one was Mark and I were going to go to Cannabis, and we were at the Toronto airport, and of course, no money, no drugs, like, we're not stupid. But we got arrested at the airport before the next day was when they were coordinating a national set of raids in Vancouver, Toronto, Ottawa. So ultimately, cannabis culture, like, in a 10-month period, had 30 locations open or ready to open. It was a success story, you know, a young 30-something female entrepreneur able to organize a business model that wasn't about a big conglomerate, but it was about small businesses being able to do things their way and giving back to the cause. That was the goal. And that's clearly why I was not allowed to continue. And a lot of reasons, you know, went towards getting busted and charged. And I was facing some serious jail time, but got a massive fine of $250,000 or $200,000, which
That's a lot.
they knew I didn't have it. They knew that I didn't have it. Second, my cat needs to go. Yeah. So the police have been investigating and watching. They raided my apartment. They were filming me from far away with long lens cameras. They had access to everything, and they knew a $200,000 fine for me and a $200,000 fine for Mark would be crippling. It would make sure that we could never afford to apply for a license or to do anything else. Plus all of the, you know, the character assassination, which means that people are hesitant to work with you because then they might lose their opportunity. We're seeing more and more of this happening in society generally, just cancel culture or whatever. I don't know what to call it, but the idea that, you know, people become toxic and their lives become ruined, and anybody who wants to even associate with them, if they know the truth, are scared to associate with them because they might be attacked too. It's a very strange world. So it was a serious punishment, and I think like 30 people were arrested who got let go with no charges at all. So that's great. But yeah,
How many people were charged? Was it just you and Mark, or?
no, we had three co-accused, Chris and Aaron Goodwin, who were business partners with. So Mark didn't actually own Cannabis Culture. I was still the owner, and he was a franchisee. So he was like, "I'm going to open some stores and pay you the franchise fee," and I'm like, "Great, that's a nice business." So that was our relationship. But he was tremendously successful. He has a massive following. He did really well, and that's good for him. Again, I wasn't really. We did all right, but certainly that was never my goal. If I was really into it for making money, I would have just sold it underground or gone to the pot stock market and bought shares. But that's not what I'm in it for. But my co-accused, they got charged as well and got much smaller fines and punishments. But I have a trafficking record, even though they admit that I was never actually. There's no evidence of me buying or selling marijuana myself. I was originally charged with a bunch of conspiracy charges, and conspiracy, of course, is way bigger and badder and has much more punishment. So I agreed to trafficking above 3 kilograms, which in Canada, there's like small traffickers under 3 kilograms. And then there's the big bad queen pins like me who are above 3 kilograms. And so I had to plead guilty to that. Plus proceeds of crime, money laundering type charge. Even though I paid all my taxes and all of the evidence they seized included all the records of all the taxes paid, we're not shady. We were above board. We were begging to be legitimized and legalized, and we were doing everything possible to be open and transparent. But yes, they went after us and they took everything that we had. But thankfully, I don't own assets or property. I always knew, like, if we're going to be on the front lines, we're going to get targeted. And if I have nothing for the cops to take, then they just fine you for money you don't have, and then you have to earn that money and then pay it off. And so thankfully I was able to spend 2 years working hard, getting some money, paying off my fine. So I'm done probation. I'm free and clear, except my record means I'm not allowed to own a cannabis store. I'm not allowed to do a lot of the legal options that are available to the people who arrested me. So that's been difficult too, to realize I can really only be in the legal industry.
There's no social equity in the business licenses in Canada, and we've run into that in America, and they're starting to implement some, but it's still is prejudice against people who help start the industry or who have a long time love of the cannabis in our culture.
And it's also, we're seeing some predatory practices happening where big corporations go to license holders who are from the minority groups who were persecuted and who got a license as like a social justice sort of approach, but then they don't have the money to pay for these people who are granted the pass to try and get into the industry. They suddenly realize, like, wow, I have to compete against big venture capitalists with billions of dollars, and I need to partner with them. So what ends up happening, and we saw that in Canada too, a lot of these big corporations just go to the license holders, like in Ontario. And a perfect example is in Ontario. The government decided to have a lottery system where they would randomly pick the license holders. So anybody could apply for a cost, but they would randomly pick people. And what happens is some average Joes did get picked. And just like Susie Q, who only had a hair salon, suddenly is told, you're allowed a multi-million-dollar profit business. And she goes, I don't know anything about weed. I don't know anything about anything. Like, who can help me? And then you have Canopy Growth and you have Kronos. You have these big corporations coming in and saying, don't worry, little buddy. We'll take care of you. Give us your license or our branding or our money. And then what we've seen over the years is a lot of those people end up getting screwed over and shut out from the business. It's like a trap. A lot of them get taken advantage of. And because they don't have the knowledge and the lingo and the connections, they can't really compete. So it's been hard to see even the efforts to try and make the industry more fair kind of get manipulated. But I got to keep reminding myself this is how the whole world works. Even the iPhone I'm using right now is not sin-free, if we want to talk about sinful things or whatever. But you have to make your compromise. And back to your original point, like about these ballot initiatives and the progress that's made, but it's at a cost. And I've had to come to terms with that a lot. Mark would often remind me when I felt a little bit discouraged and maybe a bit self-pitying, I'll confess. But he would say, Jodie, nobody asked us to do this. Like, we did what we did because we wanted to. We did what we felt was right. And that's what we have to live with. And it reminds me of many pioneers who are unnamed in history, even who, laid down the stones of the path that we all walk upon now. And I console myself with two different stories, actually, or three. I have three interesting little anecdotes. One is that when I was in Toronto, after getting arrested and having our businesses lost, I was at a nice restaurant, and the waiter who recognized me said, I want to thank you for making it legal. Similar to what you said, it's kind of weird feeling like, don't thank me for this mess, but okay. But he said, I want to thank you for what you've done because, my daughter is going to read about you in the history books. And I was like, oh gosh. And then he says, and she's going to university because I bought those pot stocks and I sold them and I put the money in her education account. So thank you. And I was like, oh, those pot stocks are evil, but you're using them for good. Okay. And to that end, I have been included in some textbooks and courses, and there's something big coming up too in the next year or so on that end as well. So history, we're part of it, whether we're being erased or attempted to be erased. But that story really stuck with me because I needed to realize things are complex. Nothing is black or white. And then another story was in Toronto. We had a lot of our locations were in the gay village districts of the cities they were in, Ottawa, Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver. And I remember during Pride Month, there was an interview with some old school activists from the gay movement, the gay rights movement in Toronto. And they were being asked about how Pride has become very corporate and our big banks all get involved and everybody's waving rainbow flags and pledging their support. And isn't that good? Like, isn't it good to see the gay rights movement transform into an even bigger movement for even more people and even more identities, and to have major corporate and government support? Isn't that awesome? And these old gay activists who are sitting around and they're like, well, yeah, it's good. We love seeing two of our gay guys walking down the street holding hands. That's awesome. We wanted that all along. They're free. They're able to live as themselves, and that's what we wanted. But the community is gone. The community, we were activists. We were fighting in the trenches together. It was like our differences didn't matter because we were united in a common goal. But as soon as that goal is somewhat achieved, you start to see differences. Like how legalization, we all said, legalize it. And then the follow-up is, wow.
Right.
We didn't really talk about that when we were just trying to get the message out there. And then you start to see a fracturing. And so that spoke to me too, because it felt like our cannabis movement, all these friends, the people that I saw at the Global Marijuana March, 50,000 people marching through the streets of Toronto at my side, and we were in it together, and it was beautiful. And that's gone now. There are no more rallies, at least not here in Canada. And that's gone, and it makes me sad, but it also reminds me that we did our job. And then the third little story that sticks out to me that I've kind of turned to, I read Rosa Parks' biography. And, she says she did a lot of work beyond just not giving up her seat on the bus, and that she was proud of all the work she did, and that over the years, the civil rights movement got bigger and stronger, and there were massive marches. And she wrote about how back then there was not really much for the internet. There weren't selfies. Like Rosa Parks wasn't selfieing on the bus. People didn't know what someone looks like. So she was describing a scene where it was a giant march and parade, and Martin Luther King Jr. Like all the big wig, everybody was there, and she was there. But she's kind of a meek person, and as the crowds kept swelling, she would kind of get sucked into the crowd and pushed out to the side of the street. So she would just stand there and watch as people kept marching, and then someone would say, Rosa, get to the front of the parade. You deserve to be up there. Come on. And so they'd pull her back in and get her up near the front, but she would get pulled back again. And it was this fascinating story of like how, she was one of the leaders, and yet the people she was leading didn't even recognize and didn't really need to. Like, what is this about ego? Like she doesn't need to get recognized, but it just put an image in my head of all the activists, the people that were such giants in my mind when I first started what I did. I mean, there's Eddie Lepp. I could go on and on. We all know.
Yeah.
And Dennis Ross. I mean, there's so many people who they're remembered by those of us who spent at least a decade or two doing this, but the new industry wouldn't know and they wouldn't care. And that breaks my heart in many, many ways. But then I also have to remind myself, I can't really name a bunch of female activists who gave me the right to vote. Like, I don't actually know all the history of other movements and of things that I benefit and like. So is it about ego? Like, what was the reason for doing it? And ultimately, I'm at peace knowing that, like,
Yeah.
nobody. This is the first interview I've done in a long time because.
Well, we're glad to have you on.
Oh, I'm so
Great.
grateful. I'm grateful, and sometimes I get tired of feeling like I'm saying the same thing over and over again. Like, oh, boo-hoo, it didn't go the way I wanted. And a lot of people will tell me to shut up and stop complaining because they say what they say. But at least I know in my heart that no matter what happens from now on, like I put down some stones in that path that other people are walking on now. They don't need to know who did what. We all did stuff. We all did things big and small, and even just having like a family, like your wonderful wife standing by your side and being involved with just the love that kept you going. And so there's so many people who have contributed, and we can't really try to measure contributions.
Yeah.
Or
We're a global community, like your magazine pointed out. I think we've gone over an hour now, so we'll have to get it just a little bit. But I want, you mentioned my wife. I want to thank you, and helping her in Canada to get. My wife is a dual citizen, America and Canada. Her father's from Canada, and so you have to have a Canadian passport holder to vouch for someone to get a passport in Canada. And since we know you and you know Teresa, you were the obvious person. I'm so grateful that you helped her to get her first Canadian passport.
absolutely my pleasure. I'm just so surprised. I'm like, aren't I a big troublemaker? Maybe you shouldn't associate with me.
Right. No, it was great. But we had Jodie Emery here in Vancouver, Canada. I look forward to having you back, talk about what you're doing now. I look forward to seeing that book. I've got to write one too. Somebody out there might read it. But thank you, Jodie, and keep working to restore him. Good night.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.